In a province as diverse as Ontario, many communities simply don't get the so-called airtime in the mainstream media that allows them to see their own stories reflected there. One person who's trying to offer just that for Somali Canadians is Hodan Nalayeh. She's the host of Integration TV, a show that airs on the Omni television network, and Hodan joins us now for more. Hodan, it's really nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What is Integration TV?
Integration TV is the first television in English, television show in English across Canada for the Somali community.
And why did you start it?
Pretty much, I didn't see diverse stories about the Somali Canadian community, and that's why we started this television, to showcase different people in the community who are doing not what is just being reported in the mainstream media.
And why in English?
Well, part of it is that multicultural programming in Canada tends to be all in the language of that community. A lot of the parents came here when they had kids. The kids didn't necessarily connect with the culture. They were very integrating into the Canadian society, so they didn't speak the language anymore. So the programming did not cater to them that would be on the traditional cultural programming in Canada.
Is that why you call the show Integration?
Yeah, when I first started it, I called it Integration really to kind of like show Canadians what the Somali community is about, the success they've had, the contributions they've made to Canada. But after a while, it kind of became integration back to our culture, because I myself didn't know much about, the Somali culture, the Somali way of life. And it wasn't until I traveled back home that I started thinking maybe this is kind of educating our kids about Somalia and Somali people.
How come you didn't know very much about Somali
Well,
culture?
because the Civil War, I think our parents, when they arrived in Canada, was just, they were devastated, right? They kind of looked at life, this is a new country, you have to remember, Somalia is like this beautiful country that has all these beaches and amazing food.
But is it? Because, I've never been to Somalia, and what I see on the media is, again, war, and you hear about the pirates. So you're saying it's not all like that?
Well, the way I compare it to is people from the refugees now from Syria. They lived a pretty good, comfortable life in Syria, and similar to my parents, like my dad was a governor back home in Somalia before the Civil War. We lived a pretty good life in Somalia, people lived a really comfortable life, and then the war breaks out and people have to be scattered around the world. So this kind of turns into I understand my parents' pain now of them trying to just settle into a new country and just forget about, where they can't go back to, because they always talk about the good old days of living in Mogadishu or the great country they come from.
Earlier on, you said a betrayal of media. So do you think that the media portrays Somalia in a negative light?
Well, I think there is just one narrative out there, right? I mean, everybody has a right to share their narrative of what they think about people or where they travel to, what they see. And the narrative for the past 25 years has been war, has been conflict. And part of it is, some of it is true, but that's not the only story. There's other stories. There's other stories of people who live in a great country where 98% of the country is safe, and there's just one city that usually tends to have problems. So, there's other stories that can be told, not just one narrative of that community.
Well, I wanted to read something from the Global Affairs Canada, and it advises against all travel to Somalia. If you're currently in Somalia, despite this advisory, you should leave immediately. The security situation in Somalia is extremely volatile, and the threat of domestic terrorism is high, particularly in south-central Somalia and in the capital, Mogadishu. The rule of law is virtually non-existent, and there is no guarantee of a fair trial or that local courts will respect diplomatic or United Nations immunity. What do you think of that?
I think it's valid in some ways, but I also think that, again, there's another story, right? Majority of bombings that are happening in the country tend to happen in certain areas, right? But for me, I don't focus on that. I think as somebody who cares about sharing human stories, war is one element of it. There is the mother who has, children that she wants to provide for, who's selling camel milk on the streets in Somalia. I mean, is her story any less valid than the guys who are bombing the cities?
I want to show a clip of your show, Integration TV.
Hey, Mustafa, how are you? Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
So I'm so excited to learn about your business. I want to check out your place and what you're doing. You're an inspiring Somali. Let's meet him, guys.
Welcome. Come on in. So welcome to Flock. We saw a need in the market for healthy salads and rotisserie chicken. And it's sort of, people are today are looking, what they're putting in their bodies. So people are a little bit more health conscious. They know exactly what is in every food that you pick up at the supermarket. So we really wanted to do something that was simple, quick, and healthy at the same time.
Doing a show like that, is that a way to combat the stereotypes?
Oh, that show, it just shows you that Somalis are not just one kind of people. We have a lot of successful entrepreneurs. We have a lot of business owners. We have a lot of accomplished young people. And I think the media doesn't show that. So
And the Minister of Immigration is from Somalia.
Hello. Yes, exactly. So, I think for a community that's only been in Canada the last 25 years, we've done pretty well. I mean, we came to this country without really any resources. This was just like Canada accepted 30,000 Somalis and they were brought here. It wasn't necessarily they were given the tools and how to figure out this society, because going to Somalia, I realize now, it's a totally different country, the way the customs, the way of life, and compared to Canadian society. So I'm just happy that we survived.
What was the first time, when you went there the first time, what was it like for you?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, to be honest with you, when you come from a society that all that you've been told is the bad about it, and then to go there and see for yourself that you actually come from really amazing people who are resilient, it was just really powerful for me.
You've been called a change maker. What are you trying to change?
I think probably just the perception of the people that I come from. I mean, people don't know that Somalis have a rich history in East Africa. And I think it's just changing that perception to say that our lives are just as valid as anybody else.
And I think, too, it brings us back to that conversation about the power of representation. Because if you always see yourself as depicted as one thing in the media, for the younger audience, who do they have to turn to, right?
Well, part of the reason why I actually wanted to do this, because I'm a mom, I have 2 children, and I want them to have a good confidence and self-esteem about who they are. I mean, I'm just as Canadian as I am Somali, so I think it's okay to have cultural awareness of who you are. This is the society we come from. It's a diverse country, and if we teach children to be comfortable in their own skin, we create a better society.
Not only do you focus on stories that are happening in Ontario, you also use social media to connect Somalis around the world. Is that something that you're doing on purpose, or why do that?
Well, what I found was that Somalis basically in the diaspora share the same story. It's like people that are scattered, had to leave their country. Now they fled to whether it's in Sweden, Norway, UK, but they're sharing similar life story, struggles figuring out their culture. Part of it is also figuring out the religion. Many people just basically didn't have role models from the Somali community. So now we're starting to have a little bit more role models in terms of achievement. So it's good to highlight those and share that with Somalis in the global areas.
Do you think you would have been able to do what you're doing now if it hadn't been for social media?
Absolutely not. I think social media is the change. It's a change that we all been waiting for. It's actually now the platforms that are created online are creating more communities than television could ever do. Television is more of a broadcast, meaning like it's reaching a broad audience. But when we're doing online television for my YouTube channel, which we're getting like 3.7 million views, I mean, to me, it shows you that people are hungry for things that connect them to like-minded people. They want to connect to their stories. They want to know about people who maybe have similar life experiences as them. And the internet is doing that. It's groundbreaking for cultural programming. We no longer have to wait for mainstream media to give us a voice.
Now, why work from the outside rather than try to change the portrayal of Somali Canadians like in the mainstream media?
Well, I think whenever you pitch stories to mainstream television, it's always about, well, this is catered to all Canadians. So part of me is always like, why does everything have to cater to everyone? Why can't we share different, diverse stories that other people might be interested in? If you're always feeding the audience the same content, how could they know what's different?
Right. And when you're covering your stories, who's your audience?
My audience is anybody who speaks the English language, who lives in Canada, who wants to learn about diverse people. I don't just cover Somalis, I also cover Muslims that are doing great things in the community, because it's also showcasing that there's other stories. It's not just about like Somalis don't want to just know about Somalis. They also want to know about great people that are in the society who are doing good things.
And I'm wondering, because some of the things that you've posted like on Facebook or even some of the stories that you've covered on your YouTube channel are, I guess, culturally sensitive. You've talked about cross-generational marriages. When you're approaching stories, are you cognitive of what the community, how the community would receive it?
Well, I think we have a unique position. Like, I'm basically a Somali who's outside of Somalia. Mm-hmm. And then when I travel back home, the people share different customs, They're may not be as educated on certain topics. Like, for instance, a man who's 40 years old, in some cultures, it's okay if he marries a 15-year-old because that culture sees it as normal. Mm-hmm. But for us who are outside of, Somalia or these countries in Africa, we look at it as abnormal because we know that certain ages, it takes maturity to have certain things in your life. And when I travel to Somalia and I see young girls who get married at 13, 14, who are not able to handle basically being pregnant and have to have a lot of medical complications from those things. So I think it's re-educating the communities. It's not necessarily we're judging. It's more like if you know better, you do better, right? Mm.
And how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself more as an activist or as a journalist?
I see myself as a person who is part of this culture of humanity and who wants to make a difference in sharing unique stories. I think that's important.
When you first moved to Canada, I want to talk more about when you first came to Canada. You moved to where?
Edmonton, Alberta.
And do you remember your first impressions of Canada, of Edmonton?
I just remember we got out of the airport, how cold it was. I was 7 years old, and I just remember we just literally came off the airport and my mom and everyone was and the doors open at the airport. Mm-hmm. And I just remember how freezing it was. Imagine we just came from Africa where it was warm. Yeah. But I don't really have much memories other than that, really, the first time.
And how about your family? You come from a big family, right?
Yeah, my parents have 12 children. Slightly big. But back then, to be honest with you, it was a blessing because I grew up with 11 amazing siblings that we have such a good support system. And like I would say, alhamdulillah, as the Muslims say, but my parents did the best they could to give us an opportunity to grow in this country and to have an education.
Did you always see yourself doing something like this, like what you're doing with Integration TV?
I didn't. What I saw myself was always trying to better society, but definitely I think this is the best contribution that I could make because as this little girl growing up in Canada, I was always hungry to learn more about being Somali and our culture. So now it just gives me this chance to give that to other young people.
And do you ever right now there's so much, especially with the travel ban in the U.S. and certain countries, Somalia being one of the countries that's targeted on the travel list. What's it like for you moving around in Toronto, moving around in Ontario? Do you feel safe or?
I think in terms of when people look at you as a Muslim woman wearing a hijab, is your safety. I think there's been a lot of cases where obviously there's some kind of hatred that happens in society. For instance, when I'm driving now, people don't give me as much pass if I do something wrong, if I turn the wrong way. It's like they see you with a hijab and they're a little bit more antsy to kind of not give you as much leeway. But at the end of the day, to be honest with you, I don't believe in limitations. If I believe that my color of my skin is a limitation, being a woman is a limitation, then I wouldn't be able to do the work I do. I think everybody can create a voice in their communities and for themselves. And I rather educate people when they're ignorant to me. If somebody says something to me that's really ignorant, I like to come from a compassion perspective and ask them, what made them think like that and give them a different perspective. Because a lot of times we're so quick to react by getting angry when people are rude to us or treat us ill. But I think it's more if we give it a chance to learn, right?
Where does your positivity come from?
My mom asks me that all the time. Why are you so positive? I think it's just realizing that this life is short. If you don't take advantage of the opportunities you have in life to do something good in this world, what good are you? We all can do something different. You don't have to be on TV like me. You could be the mom at school that bakes cookies for the kids in your class. You could be the man that gives kids soccer lessons. We all can make a contribution. Just some of us are on television.
And I saw you last week. You were at City Hall at a mosque. There's a mosque in Scarborough that's been shut down. Has it been shut down?
Yes.
I'm wondering, how do you choose the stories that you cover?
I think part of it is, well, one part of it is figuring out what the stories that are important to the community. For instance, the Muslim faith is very important to Somalis. I mean, we are just as Somali as we are Muslims. And one of the things that stories that affect the community, people will call me and say, hey, we need support. Could you cover this story? Because, the city of Toronto has decided to ban faith-based schools from purchasing properties in industrial areas. And this is the only areas that these schools can afford to be in, because it's hard to get permits in residential areas to buy property for religious education. So I think it's giving a voice to people that don't have a voice in mainstream media. And I know that when we tweeted it and talked about it, guess what? The next rally they had, all the mainstream media came.
Wow. So do you think that media is still continuing to ignore stories?
I don't think they're ignoring stories. I think we as a community have to take ownership of our stories. I mean, if you don't pay attention to your own stories, why do you expect other people to do it?
Does that mean, does that also include like negative stories?
Absolutely. I think for me, I cover also negative stories in terms of, like for instance, the Dixon documentaries or things that may have happened.
The Dixon documentary was on Vice,
Yes,
and
on
a lot of
Vice.
people thought that it unfairly covered the Somali community in that area.
Well, it told one narrative, right? And it's not necessarily a wrong narrative, but it again shows you when mainstream media goes in with people that are from outside the community, you're only going to share what you see. You don't share from the inside of that community. When I go to Dixon, I see people that are hardworking, people who bought condos, people who are trying to make it in this life. I don't see these 10 little gangs they're talking about, 10 kids in a gang that they're saying that had ties to Rob Ford.
But that's happening there, isn't it?
But this 10 kids story over 6,000 people in a neighborhood is, to me, it's like, what do you pay attention to, right? The stories that we're telling, it's all about who is telling the narrative. If that's all you care about, to show the Somali community in violence, in aggression, in negative light, then that's what you will show on the news.
And you had an exclusive with Kanon, who's in Minnesota shooting a series, right, for HBO?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, I was just actually hosting an event there, and he happened to be filming. This is amazing. Like, he's going to be doing a Sunday night series on HBO it's just for the first time about a Somali American narrative.
But he's had a lot of pushback with that because people are afraid that it will negatively portray the Somali community in Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, the community's afraid, okay? We have been basically portrayed in a very terrible light in the media. So anything that has to do with telling Somali stories, people are very fearful. But I'm grateful that Integration TV has actually earned the respect of the community to really share the stories that are important to them. So with Kanan's story, I think what's important is that here is a young man who is a world-renowned artist. He's Canadian, and he's gotten an opportunity now to work in television as a director and to share our story from the inside. So I don't think that we should look to him to bash him, but rather embrace and say, hopefully one of us is not going to tell a terrible story about us.
Well, Hodan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.